So how shall we begin the story of Košice? I think as human beings we kinda like what we already know. We like more what we expect from our previous experiences. And I think when it comes to Košice, people expect, well, let's call it the Slovak Mordor. And actually when you come to the city from the southwest, that's what you see. Huge steelworks. US steel, by the way, so it does look like Slovak Mordor with all the huge chimneys and the factory. Oh my god, horrible. And then you enter the city itself and you have all those buildings from the 70s around you. My god, it does look like Slovak Mordor. Stereotypes are true. And then those are the doors awaiting at our Airbnb, and those are the stairs. It looks horrible. It looks like, well, there you go. Again, stereotypes completely working. And it took us 1 hour to actually find a parking spot. So we changed the place, obviously, and we end up in a hotel that looked like from The Shining. 70s raw. At least there were those nice handles that Vicky likes so much. Then you're in the streets and you have crumbling buildings and what looks like closed shops. And this is pretty much how you could do a typical travel vlog from Košice. You know, looking for a car park for an hour and rusty radiators. By the way, hashtag Slovak Mordor, that would work pretty well, right? But we're gonna do it a bit differently. For a change, we're gonna have the positive side of things. Although, when you approach the old town from the south, that's what you see. 70s buildings and those horrible shopping galleries from roughly 2000. The person responsible for the urban architecture, Siberia, hard labor. And talking about Siberia, that's what you see when you come into the old town. And actually we're gonna come back to that. But now, remember the Republic of the East from the last episode. It's actually a very nice cafeteria with some amazing views, and that building will come back later, and some nice breakfast. But let's not start with breakfast, let's start with supper. Let's have the Košice Old Town in the evening. And actually we start of the evening, one of the reasons, with the highlight of the old town, which looks best after sunset. There is a huge fountain, obviously rather watery, and with some lights and with some music. And actually the music is very particular. Unfortunately the sound of water covers it, or maybe fortunately. What's playing in the background is one of the main themes from the Schindler's List, which is very weird choice of music considering it's not exactly the happiest film around. And I would say music for a nice city Wednesday evening should be rather happy, right? Anyway, it is a very nice Wednesday evening, so let's walk down the main street. And when I say main street, well, the typical design that you have in Slovakia, main street going through the city with the church in the middle. And you will see that this is indeed a very lively town. Mind you, this is not a Saturday, it is a Wednesday. So with this beautiful lively evening background, let's have just a bit of history. And the beginning is typical. First a settlement during the Great Moravian times, then part of the Kingdom of Hungary, and after the Mongol invasion of the 13th century, it is rebuilt as we know it today by the German colonists. But here's the thing, we're far away from the main centers like Buda or Bratislava, so here in the Wild East, the magnates feel free. There's plenty of robbers. Cities become extremely important, especially their loyalty to the crown. So for example, episode 8, we had Matthias Czak. Košice went against him, so Charles Robert of Anjou decided to repay the loyalty by giving it the status of a free royal town. And 100 years later, Louis the Great gave it something special. 1369, again for its loyalty, it gets, as the first city in Europe, its own proper coat of arms. The colors, red and white, that's the old Arpad dynasty, and the lilies for the Anjou dynasty that Louis also belonged to. And so, privileged by the kings and by geography, being in a very important intersection of trade routes, especially the one that was bringing wine from the south to the Kingdom of Poland, Košice grows very fast, becoming in the 15th century one of the biggest cities in medieval Europe, 10,000 people at least. so it needed also proper protection. And here, my friends, is what I call good karma. There is the Lower Gate Museum, and I thought it's closed. Turns out it's not only open, but one particular day a week it's opened till 10 p.m. on Wednesdays, and this is a Wednesday. So look, this is how good karma works. We had no idea, and it's opened here for us. And as we have in Kraków an underground main square museum, my absolute favorite in the city, if I have another underground museum about the Middle Ages, obviously we're in. And it is, as expected, underground and modern, interactive, a lot of fun. And as it tells you, the lower gate, well, here it is, 14th century, and then we can see it progressing to the 15th. It actually became more of a barbican, a proper late medieval fortification system. Can you see the arches under the bridge? Those are the arches right in front of you. So you are indeed looking straight in the Middle Ages. And actually, it was well fortified, and for good reasons. For example, late 15th century, the King of Hungary is one of the Jagiellons. And he has a little brother who was unhappy, so decided to attack Košice. John Albert, he was called. Well, he did lose in the end, but for the first time artillery was used in late Middle Ages, and the longest siege of the time lasting 6 months. He lost, came back to Poland, became king, but again he lost the fight against the Turks. So one good thing, if you come to Kraków, there's a beautiful barbican from the beginning of the 16th century. Probably that's the lesson he learned in Košice. When I mentioned the place is interactive, here you will see through one of the windows how the place looked like 500 years ago, which is pretty cool. But in the meantime, let me mention one extra thing. 15th century, Košice created with 4 other cities something called Pentapolitana, so a union of 5 cities that were supposed to help each other in case of pretty much anything, to guard privileges in case of war, any economical issues, and talking to the crown. And Košice, I think, is an easy guess, out of 5 was the biggest. Think of it as the capital of it all. But then, 16th century, it started losing its importance, as it became pretty much a border town with the Ottoman Empire, shifting of the trade routes, and also all the 17th century Hungarian revolutions against the Habsburgs. And this time, Košice would be on the side of the revolutions, not the kings. So it gradually started losing its importance. In the 18th century, it was only 5,000 people. Then 19th century starts slowly reclaiming its place, especially that it got connected to the railroads. But that will come back later. In the meantime, let's say goodbye to the lovely underground museum, and this is not only an evening of history or museums, other topics get included as well. But being on the topic of the Middle Ages, there is one place here that's unavoidable. Actually, it is simply unavoidable, because wherever you are walking around the city, eventually you'll see it, big and then in the very middle of town, the St. Elizabeth's Cathedral, the point of pride of medieval and I suppose also modern Košice. It is huge, in your face, but maybe even better symbol of medieval wealth of the city is not the grandeur of the building itself, but how fast they built it. A bit more than 100 years, from late 14th to the beginning of the 16th century. By medieval times, that's flying speed. Now, when you are at the main entrance, you can appreciate one of the most important things about Gothic architecture. Whether you like it or not, your eyes will go up, which is the point. I imagine we could easily spend here an hour or two. Such places are full of symbolism and the such, but let's have just a couple of details. So here is the bell tower, and back in the day it looked like this, the very center of the town itself. And today you've got this bell from the 16th century here. It was of course in the bell tower, but there was a fire and it kinda survived. I'm very happy that it's here because I don't have to go up the tower. I mean, me happy, my vertigo even happier. Now here's another interesting fact. Normally you have entrances from the west, and there is one, but the main entrance now in front of you is from the north, because that's the very center of town. This is the place of the market. And to further complicate it, today the touristic entrance is on the south side. So let's finally jump in. And well, to be honest, I would say it's a bit too sterile. It's still, of course, beautiful and all, but my intuition tells me it looked different back in the Middle Ages. So today it looks like it does, maybe because of the modern days, or maybe because back in the 16th, 17th century it was in the hands of the Protestants, of the evangelicals. So of course, Counter-Reformation, Jesuits were sent here, and among them was Pazmani, the archbishop that appeared in the episode number 13. He left quickly, but the other Jesuits stayed, and during one of the Hungarian revolutions there were 3 Jesuits who were martyred by the Protestant mob. They were tortured and killed. So today they are known as the 3 Košice martyrs. And it is Pazmani himself, when he became archbishop, who started their road to sanctity, so to speak. It took a while, roughly 400 years, but finally in 95 no other than the Polish Pope officially pronounced them saints. My favorite piece is this 15th century ciborium, which looks super fancy. And by the way, it is very difficult for me to actually say what is Gothic or Neo-Gothic. Now that's officially 15th century. And if it is truly Gothic, then I think it's easy to understand where Neo-Gothic got its ideas from, for all those pinnacles, rosetas, arches, and all the other things that I don't know the nomenclature for. Anyway, next to the St. Elizabeth's Church is another St. Michael's, way smaller, and when the other was being constructed, this was the official church of town, and fortunately it is still there. And to be honest, I actually liked it a bit more, as it is small. Think of it as kind of a pocket church, and of course, as beautiful as Elizabeth Church is, it's too big. There are plenty of things you cannot see because they are, for example, too high up. Here they are pretty much at hand's reach. You can easily see all the awesome details that normally you would not. So that's one thing. Another is, it was empty. Everybody goes to the big one, nobody comes to the small one. So we did not have a lot of time here, just a minute or two, but we could enter, looked around, loved it. And let's go back to St. Elizabeth's for one extra detail. Maybe the most important person buried there. A guy who actually appeared several times already. The leader of the last big Hungarian revolution from the beginning of the 18th century. Francis Rákóczi. The very same that Jánosik joined. And as you can see, very important person for the Hungarians till the very day. And he does have quite a lot of connection to Košice, and not only during his life. Today you're gonna find his grave here, and also a copy of a place from Turkey, a house where he lived his last years and died. But this is a person who is going to come back one of those days when hopefully we're gonna have the big Hungarian adventure. So expect more on him in the future, hopefully. But that figure brings us to the topic of the Hungarian Košice, as there are plenty of important Hungarian people connected to it, and walking around the streets you will see the Hungarian flags and the flowers in many places. Couple of examples. Sándor Márai, a very important writer from the 20th century. Then you have an engineer responsible for the Panama and especially the Corinth Canal, and also a writer from the 18th century. So you will see such things walking around town. But maybe the best example of how important it is to Hungarians, during the Vienna Award from 38, Košice became part of Hungary under Horthy. But then again, Stur was here as well, plus a gentleman who appeared in episode number 3, an engineer, Aurel Stodola. So Slovaks were here as well. So let me here comment 2 things about statistics back in the day. And I will use this beautiful synagogue as background. Yep, of course we found synagogues. And this background is perfect, as First manipulation is through administration. And a very good modern example you will find in Israel. Tel Aviv, officially a city of fewer than 500,000 people. I would say Tel Aviv is 1 to 1.5 million. Why the difference? All the towns that surround Tel Aviv should be districts of the city, but they remain separate cities because that way Tel Aviv remains kinda small. Jerusalem is the biggest city in Israel. That's administrative manipulation, and it was common back in the day in Europe. So for example, beginning of the 20th century, Košice officially roughly 70% Hungarian. But which Košice are we talking about? What are the borders of the city? Excuse me, what city? It was 44,000 people. That's not a city, that's a town. Why weren't the villages around part of the city? Maybe because they were full of Slovaks and the statistics would change. I don't know, but that's my guess, as it was very common back in the day. Another way to manipulate statistics is that you cannot state your nationality, you have to state language. So the Jews in Hungarian Kingdom could not state their Jews, they had to state language. If they're assimilated, they speak Hungarian. Bam, in statistics suddenly you've got more Hungarians. So I don't know, but my guess is both manipulations were used. In the background you could hear music. Those guys here were, for a good reason, practice before appearing in the old town. Such are the beautiful things that you can stumble upon when you walk around the old town. But when we leave the main streets, we find another highlight, another synagogue, and we were convinced it is neolog, very particular architecture. To us, it actually looked like social realism. Well, definitely not common, so we were sure neolog. This is actually Orthodox. That was a bit of a shocker. And of course, we wanted to see it from the inside as well. Unfortunately, the doors were closed. But what beautiful doors those are. Anyway, this is how it looked like back in the day. Did survive the war, as you could see. Unfortunately, the people didn't. 12,000 local Jews died, plus most of the Hungarian Jews on the way to Auschwitz were going through here as well. But to finish properly the story of Hungarian Košice, I was always saying, I always say, I will always keep saying, cities like Košice with hundreds of years of history of trade are not national, they are international, and that's exactly their charm. So Hungarians were always here, and they're actually still here. There is a Hungarian theater, there is a high school with Hungarian as the main language, and actually by complete chance we entered a restaurant which is affiliated to the Hungarian society. And we talked to the waiter. He said the older folks, sometimes they get grumpy about the issue, but he said, we, the new generation, we have no issues with double national identity, as it should be. Now, to me, the main symbol of Hungarian presence here is this church, which looks different to everything we used to see. No wonder. This is Reformed, Calvinist, and that's the type of Protestants that the Hungarian nobility especially was heavily drawn to. And in Hungary, supposedly, there is still the Calvinist Rome. But there's no time to ponder that, and there's another museum, the old prison, the Museum of Executioner. Now, a typical thing where you have the gate, that's where the church is today. Left of it, the tower was the executioner's home, typical in Central Europe, and in the museum also typical issues like the sword. But here there's a cool detail. Ius gladi civitatis Casovie, so the sword of law of the city of Košice. Also, you've got some good old ropes for hanging, but the highlight of the museum are actually books. In those books, the city would write in detail how much they have to pay the executioner every month, and for example, if he's working holy days, extra pay plus how much wine and beer he drank on those days. We don't think about it, but those guys were officials of the city, civil servants we would say today, so everything had to be written down in books in detail. Now also when it comes to books, turns out some of them could read and write, and that's another thing I never thought about. Could they? Well, here they could. But just in case somebody could not read, they would also draw those little symbols on the sides, symbols of punishments, so even people who cannot read know what it's all about. Now, in case you're wondering if the museum takes it all seriously, well, they take it very seriously, an extra step to show you how it used to look like. Plus, because it was a prison, there is some prison graffiti, some of it 300 years old. So, to sum it all up, if anybody's thinking, oh, it was better in the good old days, no, it wasn't. It simply wasn't. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to leave you here in such a dark mood. We are leaving the museum, and right next to it is probably the cutest street in town. Actually, a very cool idea. Something called the Street of Crafts. Because there are many interesting arts and crafts which used to exist back in the day, and now they're disappearing. Some of them, maybe it's a good idea to save. So how would you do that? Well, how about having shops in one cute street dealing with those arts and crafts, and how to support them? Well, if it's a nice cute street, tourists like us will come and have a look, or maybe two, or maybe even buy something. So I hope the idea works, although as you can see on a Wednesday it's kinda empty. And let me tell you like this. I simply walked through it and I liked it. But Vicky, I had to wait at the end of the street for a good half an hour. Vicky absolutely loved it. She had to go to half of them, and of course we didn't really buy anything because we have no space. So we are crowdfunding to buy a huge villa to accommodate all the things we would love to buy in such places. Thank you very much. Well, joking aside, we do appreciate such places of crafts, and you should pay well for it. Best with golden coins. And this is slightly overlooked, I think, but maybe the most important highlight of Košice, the Košice treasure. They found, back before Second World War, in this little container around 3,000 golden coins, some medals and a golden chain amounting to 11 kilo of pure gold. So the numbers are already impressive. It's more impressive still when you see it, and more impressive still that nobody actually looted it, one of the very few unlooted coin collections in Europe. And when I say one of the most important ones, not only huge numbers, but it covers half of the continent. Some of them are also unique. For example, this English coin or a medal with Ferdinand Habsburg himself. And I also included photos of the details if you'd like to read them. Let me also have a little moment of patriotism, as there are also coins here from the famous Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, but also from a region which is today part of Poland called Silesia. Back in the day, many little princedoms. To all my numismatic nerds, it is a must-see. Ooh man, quite a lot of running around, wouldn't you say? Maybe even a touristic marathon, you may want to say. Well, you'd be kinda right to say that. Another little detail. The third in the world and the first in Europe marathon took place in Košice in 1924, and of course there is a very nice monument about it. So now that we moved into the 20th century, another very interesting museum we found, definitely 20th century, the Museum of the Victims of Communism. Now it is actually not exactly a museum, it's more of a space with information about the topic, and the space is very little. Basically you can walk around it in 1 minute, and that's pretty much what we're gonna do right now. But it's not about quantity, it's about quality. In that little space they managed to squeeze in a lot of information, and not only to read, but as you can see there are screens, so you can also listen to some of the people who went through it. So it is partly interactive, and as small as it is, easily you can spend 1 hour here. I think we actually spent 1 hour and a half. Anyway, I think the best way to introduce it is to let our guide in the museum tell you about it on his own.
Nachádzame sa v múzeu obeti komunizmu v Košiciach. Hovoríme tu práve o príbehoch ľudí, ktorých sa dotkol komunistický režim a vlastne museli a trpeli kvôli tomu, že komunizmus nastavil nejaký systém, ktorý porušoval ľudské práva. Za mnou sú mená obetí komunizmu na Slovensku. Vidíme ich mená s rokom narodenia a miestom narodenia. Našim návštevníkom hovoríme to, že ak by sme chceli vidieť mená všetkých obetí komunizmu na Slovensku, tak na túto prezentáciu, hoci prebieha v 2 stĺpcoch, by sme sa museli pozerať 12 hodín. Príbehy obetí komunizmu máme rozdelené do takých kategórií podľa jednotlivých tém. Máme to rozdelené na 2 obdobia. Obdobie tvrdých perzekúcií, čiže od roku 1948 po rok 1968, a druhé obdobie je od roku 1969 po rok 1989, čo je vlastne obdobie normalizácie. Takým veľmi zaujímavým produktom nášho múzea je mapa obetí komunizmu na Slovensku, ktorú si môžete aj vy pozrieť na stránke obetikomunizmu.sk.
So a couple of photos of what stood out. Of course the gulags, but this is even more. It's a camp from Czechoslovakia and it says, "Work will set you free." Rings a bell, right? The Iron Curtain was present, of course, with people who did not make it, but there were also people who hopefully did, because they had some very interesting ideas how to do it. Now the events of '68 and the Warsaw Pact intervention, that's of course here present as well. Denouncing Russian soldiers for shooting civilians. Oh, I'm having déjà vu with 2022. Now the Communist Party had other opinions, hand in hand with the Soviet Union forever. That did not age very well, did it? Here in the corner to the right you have Václav Havel. But the date to commemorate the victims of communism in Slovakia isn't taken after Havel, but after certain Sylvester Krčmery. 24th of June 1954, he was sentenced to prison by the communist regime for basically being Catholic. And the persecution of religion is another important piece of the story here. When you leave the museum, there is also a bit of that in public space. Here's a plaque to some of the local victims of '68, plus a plaque of people who were sent after the war to labor camps. And then you have what we had at the very beginning, entering the old town. And next to the monument, big boards explaining the symbols, why they should be protected, and so on and so forth. And that dualism in public space in Slovakia, honestly, I find fascinating. But Vicky found something else fascinating. Here is the building of the city theater in secessionist style. And with secessionism, so late 19th, beginning of 20th century, come faces. On many facades you're gonna see some kind of a figure or a face, which is, to be honest, pretty normal. Wherever you are in Europe, find a building from a bit more than 100 years ago, there should be some kind of face. But in Košice, Vicky got fascinated, not only because there are many, and some of them are very pretty and so on and so forth, but because some of them are very particular. Some of them are the so-called green men. Actually, it's difficult to say what it's all about. You would find it not only in modern times, but also back in the day, Middle Ages, even ancient times. So most probably it's either a Dionysos, Bacchus, the Greek-Roman god, or maybe some kind of Celtic god of nature, or maybe a mix of both. Anyway, secessionism loved it. So next time you walk the streets of your hometown, start looking, find your own green man. Today, half-forgotten thing, 100+ years ago, completely normal. So I think some people actually started making fun of that fashion. Here are babies vomiting, and here the Masons had a very particular sense of humor. But my personal favorite is this. Already 100 years ago, somebody knew hipsters are coming. And of course, Gothic loved it already. That's why we have the so-called gargoyles in many different shapes and sizes. So I think we should ponder that issue for a moment. Now I'm taking around those very nice streets of the old town, but you may be wondering, alright, that's cute and everything, but what is the famous Lunik 9? Where's the gypsy? Where's the Roma ghetto? Well, we are not going there. See, the thing is, it's a complicated topic, Roma in Slovakia, and mind you, the Lunik is just the tip of the iceberg. Wherever you go from central Slovakia, starting going east, you will find plenty of Roma ghettos. But this is something that's kind of known. The image is out there in social space. To be honest, enough. And even if it is like 99% of the time, I think it is worth finally showing 1%. We're gonna visit something very special, a different Roma world. Let me welcome you to the Romatan Theatre, already 30 years in existence, the only state-funded Roma theatre in all of Europe. So this is actually one of our main things in Košice. We really wanted to talk to the director, and we managed to. Unfortunately, he did not want to be on camera, and fair play. Think of it like this: I'm definitely not a famous YouTuber yet, and I look like I look like. So imagine this: you have a person like me with some red head on the side showing up and wanting to talk. No wonder they were cautious. So I think they thought it's going to be like 2 minutes. We ended up chatting 1 hour and a half, and we asked about everything, the beginning of it all, how they work, their relation to the Roma world and the non-Roma world, about their repertoire, pretty much everything. Now here you have the ladies from the office showing off that they're working. They were not working, they were eavesdropping on us, being obviously interested what it's all about with those weird people. So let me share now our favorite piece of info. They have workshops for the kids, not only Roma, but also non-Roma, so that the new generations get to know each other, get more integrated. And this is a great idea. As they tend to go on tourneys, have your eyes opened. If there's a Roma festival anywhere near you, have a look at the posters if Romatan is there and go see them. Now, the funniest part of the conversation was when the director found out Vicky is from Barcelona. Of course, flamenco popped up. If you didn't know, now you will. Flamenco is another piece of Roma culture. And the director said, oh, flamenco is just several accords. Anybody can play it. Not like us. We are after schools in Vienna and Budapest. So the Central European pride in the local Roma is strong as well. I think the conversation in the end went well, as we were taken backstage. That's pretty much what you're seeing right now. Here they stage the theater, and freeze frame, there you have him, a very unique person. And I hope one of those days to go back to Košice and have a proper interview that I can record and share it with the whole world. So back into the streets of Košice, let me comment on 2 extra things. First of all, we feel like there are no positive models for the Roma people. That's why meeting that gentleman was so important. We found one school which exhibited posters in public space showing Roma as integrated, that it's possible. So lack of positive models in public space, one issue. Second, lack of language, and there are places where they are majority. The only group I found using Roma in public space, Jehovah's Witnesses. They don't exist in museums. They do exist as the gypsies, but they do not exist as, let's call it, modern Roma. In the Museum of the Slovak National Uprising, there is a plaque reminding us that there was a Roma Holocaust, which is kind of forgotten, and that's it. So they do not exist in public space in positive sense. That's one commentary. And second, I made a full episode about the Jews in Slovakia because I know the topic. 15 years I'm in it. I learned Hebrew, both biblical and modern. I met plenty of Jews from different groups and societies and so on. I know the topic. Here I do not. So that's it. There's going to be no episode on the Roma or the Gypsies, however you want to call them. But as there are plenty in Central Europe, I hope in the future I will be able to make a proper episode about it. But that is when I know the topic, and I hope you noticed my standards of knowledge are high. and meeting the director of Romatan is the first step. In the meantime though, we are walking down the beautiful park towards our last destination for today. There is a place called Tabaczka, and kind of a typical thing, old cigarette factory, and that is abandoned, and the artists, as you can see by already some signs, took over the place. And pretty much a typical story, it becomes the alternative center and a hub for a lost soul, so to speak. And here we are. So I have to tell you one thing straight up. I expected it to be bigger, but then again I keep forgetting Košice is not a big city. It's today roughly 250,000 people. So not a big city, not a big alternative center, but it's still artistic. There was a little exhibition of art warning us about the dangers of a virtual world, and I can relate. I am kind of afraid of it, hence I don't have Facebook or Instagram. So it did talk to me. But we were there in a very interesting moment. It was, as you can tell by the flag, the LGBT Pride Week. It was a letter T, to be precise, on the microphone, a transsexual person talking about experiences in life. So we thought, well, it's an interesting topic, let's sit down and listen. And after roughly 1 hour, we went away. Now, there's going to be a heresy. They are not letters, they are actual people. And people have talents, and sometimes they lack talents. And that particular person lacked the talent for public appearances. So it was boring. Simply, just like that, very humanely, I would say. But before we leave, let me show you another face, this time a very modern iteration, and time for a bit of a bitter pill. Not far from Košice is a beautiful castle called Krasna Horka. Unfortunately, it's not exactly possible to visit it because more than 10 years ago, two, I think, 11-year-old Roma boys near the castle decided to have a cigarette. Trying to light the cigarette, they started a fire, which in the end spread and burned down the whole castle. And mind you, after that, the skinheads were gathering, and there was a big thing like all the Roma are responsible. And this is not an exaggeration. I actually asked the director of Romatan about it. He said they needed extra security. So I mention it now because the moment I'm preparing this video is roughly a month after, in Bratislava, 2 gay people were shot at a gay club by a Slovak teenager, son of a politician. Do you think people started gathering at politicians' houses or something? There's suddenly no group responsibility. So let me show you the mechanism, how it works. 2 members of a minority by accident did something, fault is of the whole minority. A member of majority did something very much on purpose, suddenly no group responsibility anymore. Please be aware of that mechanism, my dear majority. So, needed to get that off my chest, but no more great wisdom from my side. It is time to say goodbye. But I hope that after the video you have no doubts anymore. Košice is more than just Lunik 9. There are plenty of amazing places to visit, plenty of very interesting people to meet, little details that make our life a bit better, detail by detail, so to speak. So we are leaving Košice with plenty of memories and ideas for the future. Last but not least, shameless product placement. But this is a product I will happily, shamelessly promote. Where to next, you may ask? How to explain it? What tips shall I give you? Maybe like this.
Na zdrowie! Dobranoc.